Let's get started. Story number one.
It was mid-July when I took the temporary lifeguard job at the Northwood Recreation Center. I was between semesters and needed something that paid more than stocking shelves. It wasn't glamorous, but it was easy work, mostly just making sure kids didn't drown, old folks didn't slip on the pool deck, and teenagers didn't try to sneak in after hours. The place was nothing special. Built in the late 70s, the pool had that dated, sun-bleached feel, with pale blue tiles chipped at the edges and faint rust stains near the drains. The weird stuff started almost immediately. My first night shift was supposed to be quiet. Management had this rule that someone always had to be on the property during late-night maintenance work, and that week the filters were being replaced. I just sit in the small office next to the pool, read a book, and clock out at sunrise. That was the plan. Around 1:30 a.m. I heard a splash. At first, I thought it was the maintenance guys, but when I stepped out onto the deck, the place was empty. No ripples in the water, no wet footprints, just silence. I waited a minute and called out, but no one answered. I checked the front gate. Still chained and locked. It unnerved me, but I figured it might have been a bird or something falling in and crawling out. But it happened again the next night. Another splash, louder this time. I ran out faster and scanned the water. This time I saw the ripples, centered right in the deep end. Then, as I stood there watching, the water moved again, like someone was swimming laps underwater without ever surfacing. There were no bubbles, no splashes, just the subtle snake-like sway of something gliding beneath the surface. I flipped on the underwater lights, and it stopped. The water went still. The next morning, I asked Eddie, one of the daytime lifeguards, if he'd ever noticed anything strange. He shrugged and said, "Yeah, the pool's kind of creepy at night. My cousin swam here when he was a kid, said he saw a hand pull him down once. Nobody believed him." I laughed it off, but inside I was rattled. There's something about a quiet pool at night, something about that vast glassy surface that feels like a mirror waiting to break. Over the next week, the noises got worse. I stopped reading during shifts. I kept my eyes on the water. There'd be scratching sounds from the drain grates. Once, I saw a pool chair shift by itself, slowly scraping across the concrete like someone was dragging it with invisible fingers. Another time, the lights flickered off and stayed off for exactly 47 seconds before snapping back on. Every second felt like an hour. But the worst night came on a Saturday. There was no scheduled maintenance. I was alone, just me and the pool. Around 2 a.m., the temperature dropped sharply, even though it was still humid outside. I could see my breath. I heard the splash again, but this time I didn't go to the deck. I sat in the office, heart pounding, watching through the wide glass window. The pool was empty, perfectly still, but I could feel it, something waiting. Then I saw her. At first, I thought it was a swimmer, a young woman, maybe mid-20s, floating just beneath the surface of the deep end. I thought maybe someone had broken in. But when I looked closer, I realized she wasn't floating. She was staring. Her eyes were wide open, and her long hair waved around her like it was suspended in syrup. She wasn't moving. I bolted from the office, ran to the edge, and looked down. Nothing. The water was crystal clear. I leaned over, trying to see deeper, and then I felt it. A hand grabbed my ankle. It wasn't a firm grip, more like a gentle tug, testing me. I screamed, fell backward onto the hot concrete, and scrambled away. My pant leg was soaked. I sat there for a long time, shaking, staring at the spot where the hand had reached me. I didn't tell anyone the full story, just said I slipped. No one questioned it. I guess the pool has a reputation. I tried quitting the next day, but the manager, Rick, convinced me to stay through the rest of the month. "It's an old pool," he said. "Pipes groan, things creak. You're probably just jumpy." I didn't want to believe him, but I stayed. A few days later, I met Claire, one of the swim instructors. We got to talking during a shift change, and I brought up the weirdness. She stiffened. "There's a story about this place," she said. "Back in the early 80s, a girl drowned during swim practice. Her name was Madison, I think. The coach thought she was faking, playing around underwater. By the time they pulled her out, she was gone." I asked her if she believed it. "I don't know," she said, "but I've seen something down there too." She told me about a time she was closing up and saw hair floating near the bottom of the pool, like someone had sunk to the floor. She dove in, heart pounding, only to find nothing. But when she came up for air, she swore she heard someone whisper her name. After that, I started digging. Local news archives, old forums, even town Facebook groups. And there it was, a small obituary for Madison LeClaire, aged 14, drowned in 1982 during a training session. No foul play suspected. 14, not mid-20s. Then who had I seen? I kept looking. And then I found something even stranger. There had been 3 other drownings at the pool over the years. 2 boys in the 90s, a woman in 2009. All different ages, all in the deep end, all after hours, and every time someone else had been on duty. I started to think the pool wasn't haunted by just one ghost. It was something else, something that took on shapes, pulled people in, something that fed off the silence and stillness. One night, I brought my phone out to record. I set it on the bench near the edge, facing the water, and waited. For an hour, nothing. Then at 2:17 a.m., the camera picked up something. A shadow, a figure rising from the deep end, slowly breaking the surface. No splash, just emergence. It stood there, waist deep, its arms hanging limp. Then it turned its head, directly toward the camera. My phone shut off. The next morning, I checked the footage. The last frame was corrupted, but I could see the figure, just barely, grainy and half-lit, like an old photograph half-burned. I showed it to Claire. She turned white. "That's her," she whispered. "That's the girl I saw." But I knew it wasn't. I remembered the face I saw, older, sharper features, cold eyes. This one was different. I stopped going near the water. I stayed inside the office, kept the lights on, and never opened the door. But that didn't help. The night before my last shift, I found a wet footprint in the office. Barefoot. Small. It led from the window to the chair I usually sat in, then disappeared. That was it for me. I told Rick I wouldn't be coming back. He didn't argue, just nodded like he'd heard it before. "Some people aren't meant for night shifts," he said. 2 weeks later, I heard on the news that someone drowned at Northwood, a teenager who'd snuck in with friends. They found him at the bottom of the deep end, lungs full, arms limp. His friends swore he'd just vanished underwater, like something had pulled him down. That was the last straw. I moved out of town. I don't even swim anymore. I tried once in a hotel pool just to prove I wasn't afraid. I lasted 5 minutes before I felt it again, the sense that someone was watching me from beneath, that cold prickle on the back of my neck. I got out and never looked back. The pool at Northwood is still open, still hosting swim meets, lessons, summer camps, but I wonder how many people it's taken that we never hear about, how many names never make the paper, how many shadows are down there now, waiting for the lights to go out and the silence to return. Because the thing in that pool, it's not just a ghost, it's patient, it's hungry, and it never leaves. Story the end.
Story number 2.
I had always been drawn to swimming pools. From the time I was a kid, I loved everything about them. The smell of chlorine, the sound of water splashing, and the refreshing coolness after hours spent under the summer sun. Growing up in a small town, our local community pool was a central gathering place. It was where we hung out after school, where birthday parties were held, and where we spent most of our hot summer afternoons. As an adult, I moved away for college, but when I came back home, I found myself drawn back to that same pool for a part-time job as a lifeguard. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was familiar and comforting. I loved the smell of the water, the way the pool's lights cast reflections on the surface at night, and the quiet solitude of watching over the water. It felt like I was coming home. One evening in late summer, I was on the night shift, which typically involved closing up the pool, doing a quick sweep of the locker rooms, and making sure everything was secure for the night. Most of the swimmers had left, and I was alone on the deck. The only sound, the gentle hum of the filtration system and the occasional soft splash of water from the last few stragglers finishing their laps. The night felt calm, almost peaceful, but there was an unsettling heaviness in the air. It was as if the pool itself was holding its breath. The last swimmer finally left, and I locked the gate behind him, securing the premises. As I walked along the edge of the pool to grab my cleaning supplies, I felt a cold chill run down my spine. I shook it off, thinking it was just the night air, but there was something about the way the water looked, almost too still, as though it were waiting for something. I grabbed my cleaning supplies and started to walk back to the locker rooms. The moonlight shone down on the pool's surface, making it look like a dark mirror, reflecting the lights of the surrounding buildings. I always liked this time of night when everything was still and quiet and the world outside the pool seemed so distant. But tonight felt different. I couldn't put my finger on it, but there was an eerie stillness in the air, and I felt as though I wasn't completely alone. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing thoughts, and made my way toward the far end of the pool, near the diving board. As I walked past the deep end, something caught my eye, a small ripple in the water. I stopped and looked closer. The surface of the pool was still, but there was definitely a disturbance in the water, as if something or someone was moving just beneath the surface. I leaned in closer, trying to see what it was. It wasn't a big movement, just a slight disturbance, but it was enough to make my heart skip a beat. I called out, my voice echoing in the empty space. "Hello? Is someone there?" But there was no response. The pool remained eerily silent. I shrugged it off, convincing myself it was just a reflection or a trick of the light. Maybe the filtration system was acting up, or there was a current in the water that I hadn't noticed. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I had been alone here countless times before, but tonight felt different. There was a strange tension in the air, like the very building was holding its breath. I turned away, determined to finish my work and get out of there. But as I walked away from the pool, I heard a soft splash, just a tiny sound like something small had fallen into the water. I stopped in my tracks, my heart began to race again, and I spun around, looking at the pool. Nothing. The water was completely still, except for a few small ripples near the edge where I had been walking. I stepped closer to the water, feeling uneasy. This time I wasn't imagining things. Something was definitely off. I hesitated, wondering if I should go check the filtration room to make sure everything was working properly. But before I could move, I heard it again. A splash, louder this time. It came from the deep end. I turned toward the water, my breath catching in my throat. The pool was empty. No one else was there. But I could see the ripples, slowly expanding outward from the deep end as if something heavy had just moved through the water. I took a few cautious steps toward the edge, the flashlight in my hand trembling slightly. Then I saw it. A figure. At first, it was just a shadow beneath the water, barely visible through the murky depths. But as I stared, it became clearer. A pale, lifeless face, staring up at me from the bottom of the pool. The eyes were wide open, staring directly at me, unblinking. The figure's hair floated around it like dark tendrils, and its body lay motionless on the pool's floor. My heart nearly stopped. I could feel the blood drain from my face. I was frozen in place, my legs refusing to move, my mind trying to make sense of what I was seeing. But the image before me was undeniable. There was someone in the water, a person, or something that looked like a person. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. "Can you hear me?" But there was no answer. The figure simply stared, its face expressionless, as if it were waiting for something. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the face. It was like I was drawn to it, compelled to keep looking, even though every instinct in my body was telling me to run. The air grew colder, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I backed away slowly, but as I did, I saw something else. Movement in the water. The figure wasn't just floating there anymore. It was shifting, slowly rising from the depths, as though it was reaching for me. I stumbled back, my mind racing. This isn't real, I told myself. This isn't real. But the figure continued to rise, its hand, pale and elongated, reaching up toward the surface. I didn't know what to do. My legs wouldn't move, my body frozen in terror. I was trapped between the pool and the exit, and I couldn't take my eyes off the thing in the water. Then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the figure vanished. One moment it was there, and the next, it was gone, disappeared into the depths of the pool, leaving only ripples behind. I stood there, trembling, staring at the spot where the figure had been. My heart pounded in my chest, and I fought to breathe through the panic that had set in. I couldn't explain what had just happened. I didn't know if I had imagined it or if I had seen something I shouldn't have. But there was no doubt in my mind that something had been in the pool. I grabbed my things and left, my pulse racing, my hands shaking uncontrollably. The entire way home, I couldn't stop thinking about the face I had seen in the water, the eyes that stared at me with an emptiness that sent chills down my spine. The next day, I returned to the pool, determined to figure out what had happened. I told my supervisor about the incident, expecting him to laugh it off as some kind of prank or mistake. But when I told him about the figure in the water, he grew quiet. He leaned forward, his expression serious. "You saw her?" he said softly. "I should have warned you about her." He went on to explain that the pool had been built many years ago, and during its early years, a young girl had drowned in the deep end. She had been swimming alone late one night, and no one had been there to save her. The lifeguards at the time tried to resuscitate her, but it was too late. Since then, there had been strange occurrences, rumors of a figure seen in the water, whispers of a ghostly presence that lingered near the pool. Some staff members had even claimed to have heard a child's laughter echoing through the building at night. "You're not the first to see her," he said, "but you'll be the last. She doesn't mean any harm. She just wants to be remembered." I didn't know what to think. Part of me wanted to dismiss it as just a coincidence, but deep down, I knew what I had seen. I could still picture the figure's eyes in my mind, and the fear that had washed over me was as real as anything I had ever felt. I never went back to the pool after that night. I quit my job and I left the town not long after. But every now and then, when I close my eyes, I still see her, floating in the depths of that pool, waiting. Story the end.
Story number 3.
I was 21 when I took the summer lifeguard job at the Old Ridge Community Center. It was a temporary gig while I figured out what to do with myself after dropping out of college. The pay was decent, and the job seemed easy enough. Sit around, watch people swim, occasionally blow a whistle or fish a kid out of the deep end when they got too ambitious. The pool had been around since the 1970s, a large indoor facility with high vaulted ceilings and faded blue tiles. The walls sweated chlorine, and everything smelled like a bottle of bleach that had been left out in the sun too long. From the outside, the building looked like a forgotten warehouse, squat and gray with narrow windows too high up to let in any meaningful light. Inside, the atmosphere was always dim and humid, even on the brightest summer days. There were no skylights, just buzzing fluorescent lights that flickered more often than they should. A few of them never turned on at all. On my first day, my supervisor, Paul, gave me the rundown. He was in his 50s, with leathery skin from decades around chlorine and sun. His voice was gravel and smoke. "You'll mostly be on evening shifts," he said. "Not many people come by after 7. You just watch the pool, keep things clean, and lock up at 10. Easy stuff." It was easy at first. I'd get there around 5, relieve the day guard, do a quick sweep of the pool deck, and plant myself in the tall red lifeguard chair. Most nights, 2 or 3 swimmers would come in, do a few laps, and leave by 8. By 9, I'd be alone, except for the janitor, an old guy named Carl who rarely spoke and kept to the locker rooms. By mid-June, something started to feel off. It was subtle at first. I'd hear splashes when the water was still. Not small ones, loud like someone cannonballed in. I'd whip my head around, expecting to see someone climbing out of the deep end, but the pool would be empty. Still, silent. The first time it happened, I told myself it was just echoes, pipes rattling or leftover waves settling, but it kept happening more often and at weirder times. Once I was sitting at the far end of the pool reading a paperback, and I heard someone swimming, the distinct, rhythmic slaps of arms slicing water and the hollow sounds of breathing. I looked up, and the pool was motionless. There were other things. Wet footprints appearing on the pool deck when no one else was there. I'd mop them up, turn around, and find a new trail leading to the diving board. The diving board hadn't been used in years. Too many injuries, too much liability. The community center had chained it off, but the chain was always slack when I checked. I told Paul about it. He just squinted at me and said, "Building's old, piping knocks, humidity messes with stuff, you're fine." But I wasn't fine. One evening around 9:30, I was doing my final rounds. The place was dead quiet. Carl had already clocked out, and I was alone. I walked the perimeter of the pool, checking the gates, bathrooms, storage closet. I just turned off the lights when I heard a splash. Not just any splash, the loud, deep kind that only comes from someone jumping off the diving board. I turned, heart kicking in my chest, and flicked the lights back on. There was water rippling violently in the deep end. I ran over, half expecting to find some kid hiding underwater, maybe playing a prank. But there was no one. I scanned the surface, then the bottom. Nothing. I looked up at the diving board. The chain was hanging off. I didn't sleep much that night. The next day, I came in early and cornered Carl while he was scrubbing the men's locker room. "Hey," I said, "have you ever seen anything weird around here at night?" Carl kept scrubbing. He was bald, with sunken cheeks and eyes that didn't like to meet yours. After a pause, he said, "Weird how?" "Like noises, footsteps, splashes, stuff moving around." He stopped scrubbing, stood up straight, and looked at me for the first time. "You been here during the storm?" "What storm?" "Storm of '97 had flooded the whole basement, whole pool room filled with runoff, took days to pump it out." I shook my head. "No, I wasn't even born yet." Carl looked away. "Kid drowned, 9 years old, got trapped under a bench. No one found him until the water drained. They shut the place down for months, said the kid shouldn't have been there. Place wasn't open to the public during the storm." That shut me up for a second. "Do you think that has anything to do with—" Carl cut me off. "I just clean man. You want stories, ask Paul." Paul wasn't much help. When I brought it up again, he got this tight look on his face and said, "Kids sneak in all the time. Probably someone screwing around." "But there's no one there." He raised a hand. "It's a pool. You work nights. Of course it gets weird. Do your job." So I stopped asking questions, but the weirdness didn't stop. The worst night came in July. It was a Friday, and the building was extra quiet. No swimmers that evening. Maybe people had gone out of town for the holiday weekend. By 8:30, I was already bored, counting tiles in the ceiling. Around 9, the power went out. Not the whole building, just the lights above the pool. Everything else, the exit signs, the hallway lights, even the vending machine in the lobby, stayed on. I was sitting in the lifeguard chair when it went dark, and it took my eyes a minute to adjust. The glow from the emergency lights made everything this sickly blue-green. Then I heard it, breathing, not mine, slow, wet, rattling, like someone trying to hold their breath after swimming too long. It echoed across the water. I stood up and scanned the room, hands sweating. The breathing kept going, louder now, more desperate. Then the water moved. Right in the center of the pool, a series of bubbles rose to the surface, and then nothing. I ran for the breaker panel light, flipped every switch I could find, and the lights came back on. When I looked back, there were 2 wet handprints on the edge of the deep end, fingers splayed wide, like someone had just pulled themselves out. I didn't even clock out. I left. Drove home shaking. Didn't tell anyone. But I came back the next day. I don't know why. Maybe I thought I imagined it, or that quitting would make it more real somehow. That night, I stayed in the chair the whole time, eyes fixed on the pool. Every sound made my heart race. The occasional drip, the hum of the air system, the rustle of the chain on the diving board. Just before close, something floated to the surface. It looked like a towel at first, bunched and soaked, but then it unfurled. A shirt. A shirt. Striped, faded red and blue. It bobbed in the water near the center of the pool. I grabbed the long pole we used for retrieving floating trash and reached out to snag it. The second the pole touched the shirt, it sank. Fast, like it had been yanked. The water didn't swirl or bubble, it just vanished into the deep like it had never been there. That was the last straw. I went to Paul the next morning and told him I quit. He didn't ask why, didn't even try to talk me out of it. He just nodded and said, "I understand." I went home and tried to forget about the pool. 2 weeks later, I got a text from one of the other guards. Her name was Dana. We'd chatted a few times, but nothing serious. Her message just said, "Did you ever see anything at Ridge? Like in the water?" I didn't answer. I didn't want to get dragged back into it. But the next day, she called me, her voice shaking. "They found something," she said, "in the drainage system." "What do you mean?" "They had plumbers come in to fix the pressure issues. They found a shoe, a kid's shoe, from like decades ago. It was lodged in a pipe behind the deep end filter. They called the cops, but it's too old to trace. Looks like it had been there since the '90s. My skin went cold. Dana kept talking. They're saying a body might have been lost during that storm, the one in '97, but the kid was never identified. They thought he got washed away. I didn't know what to say. I still don't. It's been 3 years. I drive past the old pool sometimes. It's still open, still running summer programs, a new coat of paint on the outside, bright banners advertising swim lessons and open family nights. But I wonder if people ever stay past dark. I wonder if they hear the breathing or see the shirt or the handprints. I never went swimming again. Story the end.
Story number 4.
There was a time when I believed the scariest things in life were human faces: crime, betrayal, illness, grief. I never thought fear could rise from the depths of water I once loved. Swimming had always been my escape. From age 6, when my dad first signed me up for lessons, I found comfort in the soundless glide, the weightlessness, the way my body moved with effortless grace through a lane. But everything changed the summer I worked at Briarwood Swim Club. Briarwood wasn't fancy. It wasn't even particularly clean. The facility had been built in the early 70s and barely updated since. The tile around the pool deck was cracked, the snack bar sold lukewarm sodas, and the locker rooms had that thick, moldy smell that stuck to your clothes. But it was the kind of place generations of local families returned to each summer because it felt familiar. I was 21 that summer, home from college, and working as the assistant swim coach for the club's junior team. Most mornings began before sunrise. I'd show up around 5:30 to unlock the gates and prep the lanes before the kids arrived at 6 for morning practice. My boss, Craig, was the head coach and a former college swimmer whose reputation preceded him. He was loud, competitive, and notoriously short-tempered with lazy swimmers. But he knew how to win meets, and that's what parents wanted. The first few weeks were normal. The kids grumbled about early hours, we ran drills, and the parents made awkward small talk while clutching coffee thermoses. Everything felt routine. Until the morning, I opened the gates and found the pool already uncovered. That was strange. The cover was always in place overnight. Craig was meticulous about it. I walked over and stared at the water. It was perfectly still, glassy in the pre-dawn light, but something about it felt off. Like the air around it was too quiet. No birds, no wind, just a thick, expectant silence. I checked the office to see if Craig had come early, but it was locked, lights off. I texted him, no reply. I shrugged it off. Maybe the maintenance guy, Ken, had come by late the night before and forgot to put the cover back. It didn't seem like a big deal. I set up the lanes and waited for the kids to arrive. About 10 minutes before practice, I saw Craig walking up the path, looking groggy and annoyed. "Why the hell is the pool uncovered?" he asked. I thought maybe Ken. "No," he interrupted. "I was the last one here. I locked everything." That was the first moment I felt a real chill crawl up my spine. Not fear, just unease. Practice went on. Kids swam. Craig barked out times. I kept track of laps. But something lingered in the air that day. Something tense, watchful. That night, I stayed late to clean up. Craig had left early, muttering something about a meeting, and I didn't mind the quiet. After I finished stacking kickboards and locking up the office, I sat on the edge of the diving well and dipped my legs into the water. The diving well was always colder than the rest of the pool. Deeper, darker. It had a strange stillness that none of the other lanes had. I stared into it, watching the faint glow of the underwater lights shimmer across the floor. Then I saw movement. A flicker. Quick, like something darting just out of view. I blinked and leaned forward. Nothing. Just water. Then the temperature dropped. I mean, truly dropped. 1 second, my feet were in cool water. The next, it felt like I'd plunged them into a frozen lake. I yanked them out and stood up, shivering. I turned to grab my bag and froze. There were wet footprints leading from the pool to the locker rooms. Bare feet, small, as if a child had climbed out and walked across the concrete. But I was alone. I had been for the past hour. I stood there for a full minute, heart pounding, scanning the deck. The footprints weren't just wet. They were fresh, as if whoever made them had just walked away. I followed them. They stopped halfway to the locker room door. Just stopped. No smears, no fading. Like the person had vanished mid-step. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept replaying it, telling myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe a leak in the pipe system under the deck? Maybe I'd imagined the footprints? But the next morning, the pool was uncovered again. This time, Craig was pissed. He checked the locks. He reviewed the security footage. But the cameras cut out for about an hour between 2 and 3 a.m. when presumably the cover had been removed. "This system's garbage," he muttered. We need to get it upgraded. Then he looked at me. You've been having weird dreams? The question caught me off guard. Why? I asked. He hesitated, then said, No reason. Just never mind. But that night, I did have a dream. I was standing at the edge of the diving well. The water was pitch black. I heard splashing, a child's laughter. Then I was underwater, held down by cold hands, dozens of them, grabbing, pulling, tangling in my hair. I couldn't breathe. I woke up gasping, the smell of chlorine in my nose. I tried not to read too much into it, but more things started happening. Swimmers complained about someone grabbing them during practice. One kid, Tommy, refused to swim in lane 6 anymore, said he saw a face under the water. When Craig pressed him, Tommy clammed up and wouldn't talk. One evening, a parent cornered me in the parking lot and asked if I'd heard about the accident at the pool years ago. Which one? I asked. She hesitated. I thought you knew. A little boy drowned. Back in the early 2000s. He got trapped under the diving board. They said it was an accident, but... She trailed off. They never reopened the diving well for years, only did again recently. I looked into it that night. His name was Eli Grant, 7 years old, found face down in the diving well during open swim. Lifeguards said he'd been doing cannonballs. No one noticed he hadn't resurfaced until it was too late. The coroner ruled it accidental drowning, but a few articles mentioned something strange, scratches on his arms, deep ones, like he'd been trying to claw his way up, or like something had held him down. I kept that to myself. The dreams got worse, more vivid. I started hearing things even when I was awake, splashing when the pool was empty, whispers in the locker room. Once, while cleaning out the equipment shed, I found a child's swim goggles tucked behind a dusty bin. They were cracked and stained. When I picked them up, they were wet. Craig looked worse too, dark circles under his eyes, snapping at people. One day he pulled me aside and said, "Do not stay here after dark." Got it? I nodded. But of course, one night I did. It was unintentional. I lost track of time organizing timesheets. By the time I looked up, it was nearly 10 p.m. I stepped outside. The pool lights were off, but the moon was bright, casting silvery light across the water. That's when I saw him, a small boy, standing at the edge of the diving well, so still. His head tilted slightly, as if listening to something only he could hear. I froze. He turned slowly. His eyes were black, not shadowed, not in darkness, black, like they weren't eyes at all. Then he smiled and stepped backward into the pool. I ran, not toward him, away. I know how that sounds. I don't care. Every instinct I had screamed to leave, to run. I didn't even lock up. I called Craig from my car. He didn't answer. The next day, he didn't show up for practice. I found out later he'd quit. No notice. Just walked away. The club scrambled to replace him. I lasted another 2 weeks, but the kids kept complaining. Strange things. Cold hands grabbing them. Whispers underwater. One girl swore someone was mimicking her strokes from the lane beside her, but the lane was empty. I left after a little girl, Mia, barely 4 years old, told her mom she made a friend who lived at the bottom of the pool. That was enough. I told the club I had a family emergency and couldn't coach anymore. I never went back. That was 3 years ago. I've never swum since. Last week, I passed by Briarwood while visiting my hometown. The gate was padlocked. A sign on the chain-link fence read, "Pool closed until further notice, structural issues," but someone had written something beneath it in faded Sharpie. He's still there. I didn't stop to look. I just kept driving. Story the end.
Story number 5.
I was never a strong swimmer. I could stay afloat, sure, and dog paddle if I had to, but there was always something about deep water that made my skin crawl. It's not the fear of drowning exactly. It's the depth, the way the bottom disappears and becomes a void. You can't see what's down there. You can't know what's looking up at you. Still, I took a job lifeguarding at a community pool the summer after my senior year. It wasn't my first choice. My cousin, Brian, had worked there the summer before and said it was easy money. Most of the time, he said, you just sit in the chair, get a tan, and occasionally yell at a kid for running. The pool was run by the town, but it had been around forever, originally built in the 1950s, with minor renovations over the years. Cracked tiles patched with plaster, life buoys with fading red stripes, locker rooms that smelled of mildew no matter how often they were cleaned. There was a kind of charm to it, though, especially in the quiet mornings before it opened, when the surface of the pool was smooth and undisturbed. It started slowly, like most things do. Small, easy to dismiss oddities. The sound of splashing when no one was in the water. Water on the deck in places that hadn't been walked on. Once I heard someone laughing from inside the pool when it was completely empty. I chalked it up to echoes, maybe the wind carrying sound in weird ways. The pool had tall concrete walls that enclosed most of it, giving it an almost prison-like atmosphere. I never liked closing shifts, but I didn't think too much of it until something happened during a Friday night cleaning. I stayed late to help Nancy, another lifeguard, clean the filters. It was close to 11 p.m. when we wrapped up. The pool lights were off, but the security lights around the deck cast a yellowish glow over the surface. We were talking by the gate when I saw it. Movement in the water. A figure. At first, I thought it was a person, someone who had broken in. It looked like a girl floating face down near the middle of the deep end. My heart stopped. I ran, yelling for Nancy to call 911, and dove in without thinking. The water was cold, much colder than it should have been in the middle of summer. I swam to where the girl had been, eyes open underwater, straining to see. But there was nothing, no body, no one surfaced. I came up gasping, confused and disoriented. Nancy stood at the edge, phone in hand, wide-eyed. "She's gone," I said, coughing. "I don't know where. She was right there." We searched the pool. The police came. Nothing. They chalked it up to a prank, maybe a trick of the light. But Nancy saw her too. I know she did. After that night, things escalated. The water heater would shut off randomly, and every time it did, the temperature would drop to near freezing. Lifeguards began to refuse the closing shifts. I ended up covering most of them because I needed the hours. I started bringing headphones to drown out the eerie silence. But even with music playing, I'd catch glimpses of movement in my peripheral vision. Someone walking along the deck or standing just behind the diving board, unmoving. Then came the locker room incident. It was a Tuesday night, maybe a week after the false drowning. I had finished cleaning the deck and was changing back into my street clothes. I was the only one left in the building, or so I thought. I heard a locker slam shut 3 rows over. I froze, heart pounding. "Hello?" I called. No answer. I walked slowly through the rows, checking for anyone, but it was empty. Then I noticed it. One of the lockers was dripping water. Not just damp, dripping like someone had climbed out of the pool and gone straight in without drying off. The door creaked open with a metallic groan. Inside, nothing. Just a puddle on the floor and a faint smell, like river water, stale and earthy. Not the chlorine I was used to. That was the first night I locked the main doors behind me before heading into the locker room. After that, I never felt safe unless I could see both exits at all times. I told Brian about it the next day, hoping he'd laugh and tell me I was overreacting. But he didn't laugh. "You know about the drowning, right?" he asked. "Which one?" He leaned in. "No, not the recent one. Back in the 80s. A kid died here. I don't think it made the papers, but the story's been around. They say he was the only one in the water, no lifeguard on duty. The pool was supposed to be closed. They found him at the bottom of the deep end, curled up like he was hiding." I swallowed hard. "Hiding from what?" Brian shrugged. "That's the thing. Nobody knows. But people say the pool's cursed or haunted or whatever. I never saw anything, but I always hated that place at night. Felt like you weren't alone, even when you were." I started researching after that. The town records were incomplete, but I found a brief blurb in an old school yearbook about a student named Danny Mace who drowned during summer break in 1984. It didn't mention the pool specifically, but I asked around, and people who had grown up in the area remembered. He was quiet, didn't have many friends. The lifeguard that summer was fired, apparently for negligence. That was all I could find officially. But unofficially, on forums and obscure Facebook groups, there were whispers. Other stories. A girl in 93 who claimed to see hands pulling her down. A maintenance guy in 2001 who quit after finding wet footprints leading from the drain room to his car, even though he swore he was the only one there. People talked about cold spots, sudden panic attacks, even hallucinations. And then I had the dream. I was standing on the diving board, looking down into the pool. It wasn't filled with water, but with something dark, black sludge, thick and bubbling. I could hear voices whispering from beneath it, my own voice among them. Then a hand reached up and grabbed my ankle, pulling me down into the muck. I woke up gasping, drenched in sweat, the taste of chlorine in my mouth. I stopped sleeping well after that. Every little sound at the pool sent me jumping. I became jumpy, paranoid, always expecting to see that pale face beneath the surface, because I had seen it again, twice more. Once during a swim lesson when no one else seemed to notice, and once during a thunderstorm when the pool was closed and covered. I saw her outline through the tarp, just standing, motionless as the rain beat down. By August, I was ready to quit. I didn't care about the paycheck anymore. But the final straw came on my last night. I stayed late to close by myself. The air felt wrong, thick like walking through fog even though the sky was clear. I did my usual rounds, checked the deck, locked the locker rooms. When I came back outside, the water was disturbed. Gentle ripples moved from the center outward, and then she surfaced. Not slowly, not like someone swimming. She rose straight up, feet first, until she was standing on the surface of the water. Her hair was matted to her face, and her eyes were open but empty. She looked like a porcelain doll, fragile, stiff. I was frozen. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. She began walking toward the edge, but she didn't sink. Her feet didn't break the surface. It was like the water held her, supported her. She reached the edge and crouched down, still staring at me. Then, slowly, she opened her mouth. Water poured out. Not just a trickle, gallons, an endless stream that spilled over the deck and soaked the concrete. And then she whispered something, but I didn't understand the words. It sounded like a gurgle, like someone trying to speak underwater. I ran. I didn't grab my bag. I didn't lock the gates. I just ran straight to my car, heart thudding, and didn't stop until I got home. I never went back. Not to pick up my last check, not to return my uniform. I didn't care. The pool shut down early that year. Officially, they said it was for plumbing repairs. Unofficially, I heard someone else saw her. One of the new lifeguards. He quit too. Didn't say why. Just walked off the job. Now, whenever I drive past that part of town, I take a different road. I won't even look in the pool's direction. I haven't been in water deeper than a bathtub in years. Something about it stuck with me, something that still lingers, because I don't think it was just a ghost. I think it was the pool itself. I think it remembers, I think it watches, and I think it waits. Story the end.
Story number 6.
I used to love swimming. Not just a hobby, but a real comfort. I'd grown up in Florida, where pools were practically part of every neighborhood. Summers were synonymous with chlorine, inflatable loungers, and sunburns. But all that changed the summer I turned 17. My cousin Andrew had just moved back to town after living in Colorado for years. His family bought this big 2-story house in a gated community called Riverview Estates. The place was massive, with a backyard pool that curved like a lagoon. It had a stone waterfall, underwater lights, even a hot tub section. From the minute I saw it, I told him he was basically living in a resort. That July, Andrew invited me to stay over for a week. His parents were out of town for a business trip, and he didn't want to be alone in the big house. I was thrilled. A week of swimming, gaming, and eating junk food? Yes, please. The first few days were exactly what I expected. We swam every morning and night, sometimes past midnight, the underwater lights glowing blue beneath us. The pool had this eerie beauty at night, shadows dancing on the bottom, steam rising into the humid summer air. But it never felt scary. Not then. The shift came subtly. On the 4th night, I woke up around 3 a.m. to pee. Andrew's room was upstairs, and mine was across the hall in the guest room. The bathroom was downstairs near the back door that led out to the pool. As I passed the sliding glass doors, something made me stop. The pool light was on. We hadn't left it on. I was sure of it. We'd both gone to bed around midnight after watching some dumb horror movie. I remembered Andrew specifically saying, "Kill the lights. It attracts bugs." But the pool glowed like a beacon in the backyard, and someone was in the water. I froze, one hand still on the railing. From where I stood, I could see the curve of the shallow end, and just beyond it, a pale figure floating face down. The limbs were spread slightly, like a starfish, unmoving. It wasn't thrashing, it wasn't swimming, just floating. I thought I was still half asleep. I blinked hard, squinted, but the figure didn't vanish. It stayed right there, motionless, the pool light illuminating its back. I backed away and crept upstairs, waking Andrew. He groggily followed me down, cursing under his breath. But when we looked again, the pool was empty, still lit, still calm. But no one in it. He called me a psycho and went back to bed. The next day, I didn't mention it again. I convinced myself I was dreaming. Maybe I'd stared too long into the light. Maybe it was my reflection. Maybe anything. But that night, it got worse. We were back in the pool around 11:30. The moon was out, but the clouds were thick, giving everything a washed-out, dim look. We were playing some game, racing from one end to the other and seeing who could hold their breath longer. I went under, kicking hard, eyes open in the bluish water. Halfway across, I saw something ahead of me. It was only there for a second. A pale shape in the deep end, sinking fast. A head, a shoulder, an arm. Like someone had just dived in from the side. But there was no splash, no sound. And when I surfaced, Andrew was laughing, waiting for me at the edge. "Dude, what took you so long? Did you see anyone jump in?" He looked at me, confused. "It's just us." I looked back at the deep end. The water rippled faintly. Later that night, I stayed awake, listening. Andrew was out cold, snoring from too much soda and sun. I laid there staring at the ceiling, replaying what I saw underwater. It didn't feel like imagination anymore. It felt observed, like something down there had noticed me too. I got up and went downstairs again. This time, the pool lights were off. But the back door was open, not wide, just a crack. The curtain fluttered slightly in the breeze. I knew we'd locked it earlier. I remembered the click, the way Andrew jiggled the handle twice to make sure. But it was open now. I stepped closer, goosebumps running up my arms. The night was dead quiet, save for a low hum from the hot tub pump. I peered outside. There were wet footprints on the concrete, small, bare, leading away from the pool and toward the garden fence. They disappeared into the grass, vanishing in the direction of the side yard. I slammed the door and locked it. The next morning, I told Andrew everything. This time, I didn't care if he thought I was insane. I described the floating figure, the underwater shape, the footprints. He looked pale. He didn't laugh or call me names. He just nodded slowly and said, "I didn't want to tell you, but weird stuff's been happening since we moved in." He told me his mom swore she'd seen a girl through the upstairs window, standing by the hot tub one night, arms crossed, just staring up at her. When his dad went outside to check, their neighbor, Mrs. Davila, once mentioned how the last owners never used the pool, kept it covered year-round, even in summer. I asked him if anything had ever happened in the pool. He hesitated. "There was a kid," he said. "A long time ago, like 10 or 15 years back. She drowned here. That's what the realtor said. Little girl. They think she fell in during a party." "No fence?" I asked. He shrugged. "Maybe. I don't know. My parents don't like talking about it." After that conversation, we didn't swim again. But the pool didn't stop calling. On the second to last night of my stay, I had the worst experience of my life. It started with a sound, bare feet slapping tile. I sat up in bed, heart thudding. The hallway light was off, but moonlight bled in through the blinds. I listened. Another wet slap. Closer. I stood and crept to the door, opening it slowly. The hallway was empty. Across from me, Andrew's room was dark. I whispered his name. No answer. Then the floor creaked downstairs. I moved slowly, hands shaking. As I reached the staircase, I heard the distinct plunk of water, like something being dropped in the pool. I almost turned back, almost shut the door and waited for daylight. But something pulled me forward. Curiosity, dread, some primal need to know what haunted that water. I descended the stairs and saw that the back door was wide open. The pool glowed faintly, and in the middle, standing chest deep in the deep end, was a girl. Her hair was black and matted to her face. Her eyes, I can't even describe them, not glowing, not lifeless, just wrong, wide, unblinking. Her arms hung limp at her sides, fingers pruned and gray. She stared at me like she'd been waiting. I couldn't move. She didn't speak, didn't flinch. She just existed, the water perfectly still around her. Then she sank, straight down, not diving, not moving, just disappearing vertically into the deep. I ran. I woke Andrew, screamed at him to wake up, told him what I saw. He grabbed a bat and we both ran outside, adrenaline pumping, but the pool was empty. The water still shimmered, no sign of the girl, but the drain cover in the deep end was gone. It had always been there, one of those wide circular ones with a metal grate, but now it was just a dark hole about a foot wide with water gently swirling into it. We didn't swim the next day, or the day after. When my parents came to pick me up, I didn't say much, just that I was tired and ready to go home. But as we were leaving, I looked back at the pool one last time. There was a small shape on the concrete, a wet outline, like a child had been lying there, curled on her side. I've never swum in a private pool since, never trusted the water when I couldn't see the bottom. Sometimes when it's late and quiet, I dream of that girl. I see her just under the surface, eyes open, waiting. Story the end.
Story number 7.
I first heard about the Weston Recreation Center from a coworker who told me they were hiring prime lifeguards for the summer. I'd just finished my first year of community college, and between textbooks and gas money, I needed anything that paid. The center wasn't far from where I lived, just 20 minutes west, tucked into a quiet neighborhood with aging houses and narrow streets. The building itself was a low-slung concrete box, built sometime in the 80s, and it looked like it hadn't changed since then. The paint was chipped, the vending machines half broken, and the parking lot always smelled of hot asphalt and chlorine. But it had a pool, an indoor one, surrounded by yellowed windows and heavy air. The tiles were slippery, the lockers dented, and the lighting always a little dim, even during the brightest afternoons. The Weston pool had character, they said, and by that they meant it was old, creaky, and cheap. I started in June, just as school let out. My shifts were usually in the evenings, covering the tail end of swim classes and open swim hours. The head lifeguard, Gina, was maybe in her late 30s, quiet, strict, and serious about safety. She told me not to bring my phone on deck and not to joke around. The pool had rules. Kids couldn't run. Parents had to stay behind the yellow line. Lifeguards had to stay alert. But she also warned me, almost offhandedly, if the locker room lights flicker, just give it a minute. They've been weird ever since the flood. I didn't ask about the flood. I assumed it was a plumbing thing. It wasn't until the third week that I started noticing things. Small, barely there moments that made my stomach tighten before I brushed them off. The first was a sound, splashing, late one night when I was closing up. I was the only one left. Gina had left early for some appointment, and the last swim class had cleared out half an hour before. I was doing a final walkthrough, sweeping along the deck when I heard the unmistakable plunk of someone diving in. I whipped around, heart thudding, scanning the lanes. The water was perfectly still, not a ripple. I chalked it up to pipes, or maybe the building shifting. Old places make sounds, but then the locker room lights started doing what she'd said, flickering. Not just the dull hum of fluorescents struggling to stay on, but sudden snaps of darkness, then blinding light. I stood under them one night, watching the shadows dance along the tile walls, when I caught a reflection in the mirror near the showers. It was a girl. Just for a second. She was standing near the far stall, wet hair plastered to her face, head down. I turned instantly, but the room was empty. I even walked over, my sneakers squeaking on the floor, but there was nothing there. No footprints. No puddle. That night, I asked Gina again about the flood. She hesitated before answering. 2 summers ago, she said slowly. A pipe burst, basement flooded, took out the boiler, part of the electrical. We were closed for a few weeks. That's it? Well, not exactly. She sighed, looked around like she wanted to make sure no one else could hear. There was a girl, Emma, maybe 10, 11. She was in the beginner class, real nervous around the water. One night, she slipped while coming out of the pool. Hit her head. It was just an accident, but she didn't make it. She glanced at me again. Some people say she didn't leave. I didn't know what to say. My throat felt dry. I don't tell the new hires, she continued, because half the time they start seeing things that aren't there. I didn't reply. But from then on, I kept catching glimpses. A shadow behind the lap lane divider. A trail of wet footprints leading into the supply closet. Once, I found the kickboards stacked neatly at the bottom of the deep end. I just put them away. The worst was the whispering. It started soft. A few words just on the edge of hearing. I'd hear them when I was alone, usually after hours. Come here, or watch me. Once I was locking the chemical storage room, and I heard, clear as day, a little girl's voice behind me say, "You forgot me." I spun so fast I dropped my keys. The hallway was empty. I tried to talk myself down. Maybe I was overtired. Maybe the chlorine fumes were getting to me. But one night, about 6 weeks into the job, things escalated. It was a stormy evening, and we'd stayed open longer than usual due to a late adult swim class. Most people had left by 9:30, but one of the instructors was still packing up. I was on deck, checking the skimmers when the lights went out. Not flickered, completely shut off. Total darkness except for the dull green glow of the emergency exit signs. I stood there, holding my breath, my flashlight still in the office. Thunder rumbled outside. Then slowly the lights came back on, and she was standing at the far end of the pool. It was the same girl, wet hair, pale face, swimsuit clinging to her skinny frame, but this time she looked up. Her eyes were empty. Not in a poetic sense. I mean literally, 2 black holes where her eyes should have been. I froze. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. She lifted one arm, pointed. Then she stepped into the pool without a sound. The water didn't splash, didn't ripple. She sank straight down, vanishing beneath the surface like a stone. I ran. I didn't even check to see if anyone else had seen her. I just grabbed my stuff and left. The next day, I told Gina everything. She didn't laugh. She didn't even look surprised. "I've seen her too," she said quietly. I stared at her. We had a lifeguard quit last year because she kept dreaming about drowning. Said someone was pulling her under, trying to trade places. I swallowed. "What do you mean, trade places?" Gina leaned forward. "They say Emma wasn't supposed to die, that she's still looking for someone to take her place in the water." That was the last shift I ever worked. I quit that week. Told them I got another job. I didn't. But I started dreaming about her. Always the same dream. I'm on the pool deck, and she's floating just beneath the surface, her face turned upward, eyes like black pits. She mouths something, but I can never hear it. When I wake up, my skin smells like chlorine. 3 months after I left, I got a text from one of the other guards. "You hear about Weston?" I hadn't. There'd been another accident. A teenage boy. Found at the bottom of the pool after open swim. No witnesses. Cameras caught nothing but static during the time frame he drowned. The pool was closed again, temporarily. They reopened it a few months later. They always do. And I still drive by sometimes. The lights are on, the signs are up, kids splash in the lanes, everything looks normal, but I never go in because I know she's still there, waiting. Story the end.
Story number 8.
When I was 23, I worked as an assistant manager at a mid-range apartment complex just outside Tempe, Arizona. The kind of place with beige stucco walls, low-maintenance landscaping, and a half-decent pool that acted as the property's centerpiece. It wasn't a glamorous job, but it covered my rent and allowed me to finish night classes. The pool was old, maybe built in the 70s when the complex first opened. Rectangular, 12 feet deep at the far end, and surrounded by a rusted chain-link fence that was supposed to keep kids out after hours. Of course, it didn't. Most nights, teenagers found ways in to swim or hang out, and we'd catch them by reviewing grainy security footage the next morning. Sometimes we'd leave it alone if they didn't leave trash or vandalize anything. But something changed that summer. Subtle at first. The complaints started in late May. Residents would report noises from the pool area at night. Not loud parties or laughter, more like voices underwater, garbled and low. One woman, Mrs. DeMarco from 1B, said she heard crying like a child. She lived in the unit closest to the pool and called the front office 3 nights in a row. The first time, I checked it out and found nothing. The second time, I brought my flashlight and did a thorough walk around. Still nothing, just still water and the hum of the pool pump. But on the third night, I brought the maintenance guy, Tommy. He was older, had been at the complex for over a decade, and walked with a permanent limp from a bad ladder fall years earlier. We got there just after 11 p.m. The moon was full, and the water reflected it like a sheet of silver. It was quiet, almost too quiet. Tommy held up his hand and motioned for me to stop. "You hear that?" he asked. I listened. At first, just silence, but then faintly something like splashing. Not erratic, but rhythmic. Controlled, like someone doing slow laps. The only problem was, there was no one in the pool. We opened the gate and walked to the edge. The water was perfectly still again. I flicked my flashlight across the surface, but it only showed tile and concrete. Then Tommy muttered something under his breath and pointed to the far end. There were wet footprints leading away from the deep end, heading toward the pump house. Small ones. Barefoot. Like a child's. We followed them to the building, which was locked as usual. No sign of forced entry. The footprints stopped at the door. We looked at each other, unsettled. The next morning, we checked the security footage. The camera was pointed right at the pool, but between 10:55 and 11:15 p.m., the screen glitched. Not static, just a still image, like the feed had frozen. Then it resumed. Tommy leaned closer, squinting. "Back it up. Look here," he said. Just before the freeze, a shape moved in the water. Not walking alongside, not near the edge, but in the water itself. It looked like someone surfaced and then dropped back under. The image cut right after. That was when I started doing nightly checks myself, more out of anxiety than protocol. For a week, nothing happened. But then, on a Sunday night, I saw it. It was around midnight. The complex was quiet, and the only light came from the pool's underwater LEDs, casting a green-blue glow across the concrete. I was doing my usual sweep when I noticed something at the bottom of the deep end. It looked like fabric, white maybe, fluttering in the slight current. I walked to the edge, heart picking up. From above, I couldn't make out what it was. I leaned closer, gripping the metal railing, trying to see. Then it moved. I stepped back, hard. Whatever it was had shifted on its own, not from current or wind. It coiled upward, slowly, like it had noticed me. I backed up further and reached for my walkie. "Tommy, are you awake?" I whispered. Not sure why I was whispering. No response. I looked back at the pool. The fabric, whatever it was gone. No bubbles, no ripple, just gone. The water was still again. I didn't sleep that night. The next day, I asked the property owner if anything had happened at the pool over the years. She gave me a strange look, like she knew exactly what I was getting at, but didn't want to say it out loud. "A boy drowned," she finally said. "Long time ago, early 2000s. He was living here with his mom. He snuck into the pool at night. They found him the next morning." I asked what had happened. She hesitated. "They said he hit his head, probably slipped, but there were bruises on his arms, like someone held him down. The police ruled it an accident." I asked if anyone had seen anything else. She didn't answer directly. We had a few families move out after that. People said the place felt different, but this is Arizona. People move all the time. After that, I tried to avoid night shifts, but one evening, Tommy called out and I was the only one available to close up. Around 9:45 p.m., I started the routine. Lock the gate, check the restrooms, make sure the pump room was secure. As I approached the pool, I noticed the water again had that weird shine, too still, too flat. I unlocked the gate and stepped inside. Then I heard it, a splash, loud, like someone had just cannonballed into the deep end. But there was no one there, no ripples, no waves, just silence. I turned to leave when I felt something tug at my ankle. It wasn't strong, just a slight pull. And I looked down, half expecting to see a strap caught or maybe my shoelace snagged. But there was nothing. I moved my foot again, and this time the pull was harder. I stumbled, hit the concrete, and scraped my palms. My left foot was still being tugged. I kicked hard and felt it release. I scrambled backward, panting, and shined my flashlight at the pool. Right at the edge, just below the surface, I saw it. A hand, small, pale, with fingers splayed. It rested on the inside wall of the pool like it was waiting. Then it disappeared into the darkness. I left the gate wide open and sprinted back to the office. I told the manager I couldn't do closings anymore. She didn't argue. A few days later, Tommy handed me an old Polaroid he found while cleaning out the storage shed. It was sun-bleached and water-damaged, but you could make out a group of kids at the pool. And in the background, standing near the diving board, was a blurry shape. A boy, shirtless, arms by his sides, staring straight at the camera. But here's the thing, the photo was dated 1999, 2 years before the drowning. I asked if he thought it could be the same boy. "Don't know," he said, "but he shows up in a few old photos, always near the pool, and no one remembers who he is." I kept the photo. I still have it, tucked away in a box in my closet. I haven't worked at the complex in years. I moved out of Arizona and haven't lived near a pool since. But sometimes when I'm near water, at a hotel or a friend's house, I feel it again. That tug, that cold pressure around the ankle, that sense that something beneath the surface is watching, waiting, reaching. And I never go near deep ends anymore, because I know that whatever is in that pool, it's still out there, and it doesn't forget. Story the end.
Story number 9.
When I was 19, I worked as a lifeguard at a community pool in upstate New York. It wasn't glamorous, and honestly, it didn't pay well either, but I was saving up for a used car and needed something to fill the summer. The job was mostly uneventful. Mornings cleaning leaves out of the water, afternoons watching kids splash around while their parents scrolled through phones or gossiped at the picnic tables. The worst I ever had to deal with was a nosebleed or the occasional bee sting, until July 17th. The pool was part of this old recreational center that had once been a luxury hotel back in the 50s. It was built with that kind of faded charm, cracked tile mosaics, faded awnings, and iron gates that had long lost their luster. The property was surrounded by trees, the kind that grew dense and heavy, especially in July when the air turned thick. There was always a faint, damp smell, chlorine fighting to mask mold. Something about the place felt like it had aged in a time capsule, the paint and plastic slowly surrendering to the years. I was on the closing shift that day. Tuesdays were always slow, and by 6:45 p.m., the last of the kids had been picked up. The sky had already turned that weird, dirty orange color that happens when a storm's looming. I was sitting at the lifeguard table, scribbling into the logbook, when I noticed something strange at the far end of the pool: ripples. Now, I'd been alone for almost 20 minutes. No one had gone near the water since the last family left. But I saw the surface of the deep end quivering, like someone had jumped in, even though the water stayed eerily calm everywhere else. I stood and walked over, scanning the length of the pool. The shallow end remained still, but in the deep end I saw it, just beneath the surface, a shape, pale like skin, small. It hovered for a moment, then sank quickly out of view. I froze. It looked like a child, not thrashing, not kicking, just there and then gone. My instinct took over. I jumped in, uniform and all, and swam straight down. But there was nothing. No one. Just the dim blue of the underwater lights and the concrete bottom. I swam 3 laps around the perimeter before climbing out, soaked and shaking. I checked every corner of the pool area. No kids hiding, no signs of anyone slipping in. My walkie crackled. Eileen, the front desk manager, was calling to ask if I'd finished the chemical test for the evening. I told her yes, even though I hadn't. I didn't say anything about what I saw. What could I say? That night, I had a dream. I was at the pool again, only this time it was night, and the water looked black. A girl stood at the edge, about 6 or 7 years old. Long hair, dripping wet. She wore a faded blue one-piece, the kind kids wore back in the 90s, with cartoon fish printed on it. Her arms were limp at her sides. Her mouth moved, but I couldn't hear the words. Then she stepped forward and fell silently into the pool, vanishing without a splash. I woke up gasping. The dream stuck with me, and over the next few days, I found myself dreading work. I'd scan the deep end every few minutes, looking for movement, convinced something would appear again. For a while, nothing happened. I tried to chalk it up to exhaustion, stress, maybe even the weird lighting that night. I started leaving work early, skipping the closing shift when I could. Then one afternoon, while lifeguarding during the toddler swim hour, a kid started crying hysterically near the edge. His mom rushed over thinking he'd hurt himself, but he wasn't pointing at his arm or leg. He was pointing at the deep end. "She pulled my leg," he kept saying, "under the water." The mom looked baffled. "Who did?" "The girl," he whispered, burying his face into her shirt. "She wanted me to come under with her." Everyone thought it was his imagination, a weird story from a nervous 4-year-old. But when I asked him what she looked like, he said she had hair on her face. It was in her eyes. I didn't tell anyone that it matched the girl from my dream. I barely told myself. A few days later, I was asked to cover the evening shift again. I didn't want to. I almost made up a fake excuse, but part of me needed to face it. I needed to know it wasn't real, that I wasn't losing it. It was quiet that evening, just 2 teenage girls tanning on the chairs, barely even touching the water. They left before 6 p.m., and the pool was completely mine. I kept myself busy, tested pH levels, scrubbed the filter vents, tried not to look too long at the water. The sun dipped low, and I turned on the underwater lights. The reflections danced on the ceiling like always. Then I saw her. Not in the pool this time. She was standing at the corner of the fence, just outside the gated entrance, staring in, the girl from the dream. Same blue swimsuit, same dripping hair. I didn't move, just watched. She didn't blink, didn't shift, She looked like she was waiting. Then she turned and walked out of view. I ran out the side door and around the fence, but the area was empty. The only footprints were mine in the damp grass. No sound. No movement. I went back inside, locked the gate, and stayed seated the rest of the night. I started asking around. One of the older staff, Mark, had worked there on and off for over a decade. I pulled him aside and asked if he'd ever heard anything weird about the place. He went quiet, then said, "You're not the first one to ask." He told me that years ago a girl drowned there. A long time back, mid-90s maybe. Her name was Carly or Carrie, something like that. She'd wandered off during a private event. No one noticed she was missing until it was too late. They found her in the deep end the next morning. Her parents sued the city. Big scandal at the time. The pool was shut down for a whole summer. I asked him why there was no plaque, no memorial. He just shook his head. They wanted to forget it happened, act like it was just a freak accident. After that, I started digging on my own. I found a single archived article from 1996. It mentioned a 6-year-old girl named Caroline West, drowned during a wedding reception held at the center. Authorities believe she slipped while chasing a balloon. No witnesses. She couldn't swim. Her picture was attached to the article. I recognized her instantly. That same blank stare. That same wet hair. My last week on the job, I decided to leave early each day. I stopped staying past sunset. I avoided looking at the deep end too long. But on my final shift, I was asked to stay late and help close for a private adult swim night. I said yes, reluctantly. Everything was fine until around 9 p.m. One of the guests, an older woman, asked if I could check the showers. She said she heard crying from inside. I grabbed my flashlight and headed into the locker rooms. The place was empty. Lights buzzing. Stalls open. But from the last one on the left, I heard it. A soft, wet whimper, like someone crying through water. I crept closer, heart hammering, and pushed open the door. There was nothing, just puddles on the tile. Then I heard a splash behind me. I ran back to the pool deck. The surface of the water was broken, ripples fanning out across the deep end. No one had been near it. The guests were still drying off, chatting near the exit. I walked slowly toward the pool and peered in. She was at the bottom, Caroline, lying sideways like she'd fallen. Her eyes open, hair floating around her head like black seaweed. I stumbled back. When I looked again, she was gone. That was the last time I worked there. I never went back, not even to visit. I heard from another employee months later that they drained the pool for maintenance and found one of the old drain covers from the 90s wedged into a pipe, a model they hadn't used in years. No one could explain how it got there. I don't swim much anymore. When I do, I stick to busy, crowded places. Never alone, never at night, and never in deep ends I can't see the bottom of. Sometimes, in dreams, I still see her. She's standing just beneath the surface, arms outstretched, waiting. Story the end.